Chapter 2. Dawn. Virginia awoke to the birds singing back and forth to each other. Still lying on her side with her eyes barely opened, she stared at the faint light bleeding through the window shades. For the longest time, she did not move a muscle. Then slowly, very slowly, she propped herself up with her right arm. Her long brown hair fell, veiling the left half of her face. She looked down at the bed sheets where her head had rested and saw the milky white stains created by her tears the night before. It was not a dream. It was real. She was still wearing her purple hoodie. She had on the same pair of blue jeans and a black t-shirt. Her jaw began to lock, and she felt like she could cry again. Suddenly, the light grew just a bit brighter in the room. She looked up at the blinds once more. The glow was stronger. She stayed still, pondering whether to lie back down and release another cry, or pursue her curiosity. Downstairs in the kitchen, Andrew finished making a hot pot of coffee. He and his daughter had spent half the night talking, yet his mind remained boggled and his heart unsure of which way to go. Aimlessly, he stared at the coffee maker. Life usually seemed so simple when he had a cup of coffee in his hands. Now it seemed that this entire pot could not be enough to simplify this situation. He poured himself a cup of strong black coffee. Holding the mug close to his nose, he inhaled its morning aroma and walked toward the living room. The white kitchen tiles and the wooden floors of the living room were divided by a single piece of wood trim. To the right of the living room was a wall of large windows that stretched into the den that overlooked the backyard and farther into the west. On the wall across from the wall of windows was mounted a large, flat-screen TV flanked on both sides by encased shelves containing books, multiple family photos taken throughout the years, and other mementos. In front of the TV was a long glass coffee table, and behind it stood a substantial yet plush leather couch with glass end tables positioned on each side. Stopping in the middle, where the kitchen tiles and the living room's wood floors met, he looked into the den at the deer head, mounted above the fireplace at the other end of the house. Fixing his gaze on the 6-point trophy, he stared at its lifeless, black marble eyes. "Well, you're no help at all," said Andrew to the deerhead. "In fact, you're just kind of hideous this morning." Chuckling at his humor, Andrew took a sip of his coffee. He turned his head to the left and glanced into the foyer. Without a second thought, he slowly walked into it, passing the staircase to his right. Stopping at the front door, he looked down and noticed both his cowboy boots and his niece's Converse lying beside each other to the left of the door. He gave another little chuckle and took another sip of his coffee. A somewhat troubled look crossed his face as he gazed at the new pair of shoes by the door. He looked up at the ceiling and let out a long sigh. "The last time I saw her, she was about 3 years old," he finally said. "I could hold her up in my arms forever." He looked at his Stetson hanging on the hat stand, towering above the shoes. She would try to wear that hat, but it would always slide down her head, stopping at the bridge of her nose. He looked back at the shoes. Those shoes would have been a quarter of the size they are now. He gazed to the right through the opening towards the den, his eyes fixed upon the deer head again, its eyes just as lifeless as before. Andrew groaned and looked up at the ceiling. "Dear Lord, what am I to do?" he prayed. Andrew had just enough time to sip once more of his coffee when he noticed a bright light coming through the front door. He turned to face the living room and slowly made his way to the wall of windows. Virginia's arm grew tired of propping herself up for the past few minutes, but she remained in the same position. She did not know how to address it, but something grabbed her heart. Curiosity was one of her greatest weaknesses. This would be the first time she had looked out of her window. Slowly, she placed both of her feet on the floor. Taking in the view, Andrew walked into the living room and stopped at one of the large windows on the western wall of the house. The woods in the distance produced an abstract silhouette horizon at first, but now they lived with an orange morning glow from behind the house. Virginia sat on her bed. Her feet remained planted on the floor, but the rest of her refused to leave the bedside. She looked down at the carpet and seriously considered if she would rather just lie back down or not. Unsure of how she did it, or even why, she pushed herself off the bed with her hands and stood up straight. With hopelessness and curiosity, she walked towards the blinds, one step at a time. Aside from the early morning beauty barely visible through his window, Andrew focused more on another image, his reflection staring right back at him. "Do you have what it takes?" he asked the image in the glass. "Do you really have what it takes to do this?" Just then, his visage in the window dissolved as a bright light came from behind the house. Virginia did not know what to do. She made it to the blinds, but was too complacent to make the final act. She stretched out her hand to where her fingertips were inches away from reaching underneath the bottom of the blinds. In that moment of uncertainty, the morning glow magnified brighter in the room through the veil of the window. She closed her eyes and soaked it in. Dream or no dream, her curiosity got the best of her. She had to see if this was real. Without hesitation, she hoisted the blinds with both hands. Instantly, a blast of light from the morning sun filled the room. With her hands raised high, she took in the morning light. It was twice as relaxing as before with the veil out of the way. Before her was a sight that she had never expected to see. A gravel driveway ran from the side of the house where the vehicles were parked and trailed to two large double doors on a vast red barn with numerous stalls lining the length of either side. Virginia thought that it was large enough to hold at least 50 horses. Behind the barn was a large white fenced-in pasture that stretched for at least 80 acres with a tree line of woods and mountains beyond. To the right of the barn was a thick wood that started with pine trees at its edge. To the left of the barn was a large lake, which ran out into what seemed to be a river in the distance and had the same pine woods encompassing its left bank. A soft, relaxing ambiance came with the light of dawn, and Andrew loved every minute of it. An ancient presence calmed his nerves, and a light shined on his face. There came a soft, warm voice, like the kiss of the morning light on his cheek. "You cannot do it alone, but with me, all things are possible. Prepare her for what's coming." Andrew opened his eyes, and a tear streaked down his face. He unmistakably knew that voice by heart. Instantly, an idea ran through his mind. He set his coffee down on the kitchen table. Then, with all his energy, he ran through the foyer and upstairs. He passed Virginia's room and stopped at the next one, the last room in the hallway. He quietly, yet earnestly, knocked on the door. A few seconds passed, and the door slowly opened with his daughter standing in its frame. She was wearing white and pink striped pajamas. Her hair was tousled, covering half of her face, and her eyes were barely open as she blinked at her father with the utmost perplexity. "Daddy," she yawned, "is everything okay?" Andrew carried the biggest smile on his face as he whispered loudly, "Yes, everything is fine. I have an idea." Stacy stood waiting for the plan of action. "Okay, and what might that be?" "You'll see. I need to run into town to buy something. If Virginia wakes up before I return, can you please watch her for me?" Sure. Of course." "Okay, great. I'll be back as soon as I can. There's coffee ready downstairs, should you want some." And with that, Andrew took off down the stairs. He quickly slipped on his boots. After putting on his coat and Stetson, he reached down and picked up Virginia's Converse. He opened the door, brushed his fingers across the mezuzah, and kissed them to his lips. "Thank you," he exclaimed in a whisper. A second later, he closed the door and was gone. Stacy remained standing there, wondering what had just happened. Did Dad wake me up to tell me that he had an idea, but did not tell me what the idea was? Yeah, that's Dad. She wanted to return to bed so badly, but remembered that she was now the one to greet Virginia should she come downstairs before her father returned. "Please, say the coffee is strong," she said. She grabbed her white house coat off the footboard of her bed and walked downstairs. Virginia dropped her hands, letting down the blinds. She did not know what to think or do. She lowered her head. The sun still rose over the earth, but her life remained upside down. They were really gone. She could still remember the scene as if it had happened yesterday. Blood was everywhere. The couch was torn as if something had sliced it multiple times, its stuffing scattered throughout the room. The lamps and end tables laid in pieces across the floor. And the bodies. Virginia shook her head, trying to cast out the memories in her mind, but they were still fresh. After all, it had only been a week since the incident. Everything had happened too fast. Tears began to form in her eyes. She quickly wiped them off, refusing to engage in another cry. She walked away from the blinds and back to her bed. She stood before it, wanting to crawl in, but felt she would only ensnare herself into another spiral of emotions. Is there another alternative? She asked herself, drying her eyes. Numb to all around her, she turned and left the room. Virginia took in the scenery more in the hallway than when she had arrived. To her right, the hallway continued with 3 other bedroom doors similar to hers. Down the hallway to her left was one more bedroom door. Further down the hall was a door that looked different from all the others. It had a stained glass window with a 6-pointed star in the center. A light shone brightly through it, tempting Virginia to open the door. Surrendering to curiosity, she walked down the hall and placed her hand on the doorknob. Opening it slowly, she unveiled a large, welcoming balcony suspended by porch pillars below. It was constructed of beautiful wood, painted white. The floor was aged and in need of a fresh coat. Brown, yellow, and red leaves and pine needles were scattered and blowing gracefully across the floor. Old furniture, coated in white paint matching the porch, was arranged for conversation. Yet, on the far side was a single chair facing west, with a small white table next to it. It looked very lonely and old, as if someone was still sitting in it, waiting. Virginia stepped out onto the balcony and looked around. What took place up here? She slowly walked over and stood behind the single chair facing west. What about you? Why are you separated and turned in the opposite direction from the others? She brushed her fingers across the backrest of the chair. Finding clues without answers, she turned around and returned to the stained glass door. Stepping back into the hallway, she took one long final look at the old balcony before closing the door. Before walking down the hall towards her room, she saw a spiral metal staircase winding up to the 3rd story of the house at the far end of the hallway. That side of the hallway was rather shadier than the rest. What could be upstairs? She shook her head. Not now. Maybe later. She made her way to the stairs and walked down to the foyer. She reached the bottom step, and then it hit her again. She was living with her uncle now. Watching the sunrise and discovering the old balcony made her forget exactly where she was. She grabbed the end of her hoodie sleeves between her fingers and palms and crossed her arms, drawing the thin cotton jacket more comfortably over her. She turned around and walked past the staircase and into the living room. Walking over to the wall of windows, she looked at the bend in the river and the pine trees that encompassed its borders, the white fence, and the long stretch of the 80 acres of land. She saw the red barn that could hold presumably 50 horses, and the workers already awake and about their business on the ranch. But most of all, she noticed the light of the morning dawn hitting the land from behind the house and how it engulfed the picturesque view. "Beautiful, isn't it?" said a voice. Virginia jumped and looked around the room. Standing in the kitchen holding a coffee cup and wearing a white housecoat and striped pajamas was a woman with black hair about Virginia's height. "Oh, I'm sorry," said the lady, extending her hand. "I didn't mean to frighten you." Virginia did not respond, but just stared at her, waiting. "Your Uncle Andrew is my father. I'm your cousin Stacy." She then drew a chair back from the kitchen table and sat down. "Would you like to sit?" Lowering her gaze, Virginia shook her head. Crossing her arms tighter, she continued to stare out the windows at the view. Stacy turned her head and looked at the view with her. "You know, this house was once owned by a family decades and decades ago, known as the Cohens. Things were very unusual for them. It was a new beginning in a new land with no familiar faces to call a friend." She took a sip of her coffee. On top of it all, their eldest daughter, Rose, was kidnapped by a band of Indians. There was a long moment of silence in the room as Stacy waited. Shyly, Virginia turned her head towards Stacy. "What happened to her?" Stacy smiled and took another sip of her coffee. "A very long story made short, all seemed hopeless for Rose. But little did she know that she had been watched and admired by another Indian from a different tribe. He tracked down her kidnappers and rescued her. He took her to a place unlike anything she had ever seen. Legend has it that it was somewhere not too far from this side of the country." "So what then? Did they elope and get married?" A regretful look crossed Stacy's face. "No." "No? Why not?" "She came from another life and was promised to another man even before she was born." Virginia looked disgusted. She turned to face Stacy. "What? That ritual still happened back then, even in America?" "Oh, yes, especially if you came from a wealthy background, basking in a powerful name or repute. Believe me, she and her future husband had both. Together, they would become immensely wealthy." "But what did she think of the Indian who rescued her? Was she in love with him?" A big smile crossed Stacy's face. "Oh, she loved him very much. But sadly, he was of a different kind, as her parents would have put it. He had no money, no strong connections in high society, and—" Stacy rolled her eyes at the final reason. "He was of a different race. Because of this, her parents didn't approve." Virginia's voice became sharp. "So what if he was of a different race? They loved each other." Stacy gave a little chuckle at Virginia's passion. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. "So what happened?" "She and her family returned home overseas. Some say hunters shot down the Indian because they thought he was one of the kidnappers. Others say he got away, lived his life, eventually found love, and was never seen in this land again." "It would have been better if they had eloped." "I wouldn't be so sure about that. It would not have been a wise move on their part." "Really? And why would it not have been such a good idea? Who thought it was a bad idea?" "The Indian who loved her thought it was not a good idea." Virginia's attention became more focused. "What?" "That's right. He was the one who said that they should not elope." She took another sip of her coffee. "You see, he knew that if they were to elope, her family and several men of the town would have sent out a search party to any and every town nearby. People did not stop to bother about what tribe an Indian was from. They would have considered him one of her kidnappers. A bounty would have been placed on his head, and she would have been in great danger. Both of them would have been hunted continually. He knew she would be safe if he returned her to her home. He was more concerned with her and her parents remaining together than his desires." "That's ridiculous," snapped Virginia. "She should have stayed with him, and he should have kept her." "Sometimes there are choices that we have to make in life, decisions placed on us at an early age, and if we don't follow through with them in guidance and wisdom, we risk corrupting ourselves and those around us. But this choice he made by returning her just doesn't make any sense. And often those decisions are the ones we need to make to see something far greater come our way, carrying a grander blessing. And what possibly could that grand blessing be?" Stacy looked at Virginia and smiled. Oh, if you only knew. I think you will find out soon enough. At that moment, the front door opened and Andrew hastened into the room, holding a shopping bag in his left hand. Stacy, I've got it. I hope she... He stopped when he saw Virginia standing in the living room. Oh, good morning, Virginia. Virginia was quiet again and lowered her head. Good morning. Andrew lifted the shopping bag in his hand and smiled. I bought something for you. He held the bag out for Virginia to take. I hope you like it. Virginia slowly took the bag from her uncle's hand. Opening it up, she reached in and pulled out a large shoebox. It's a pair of hiking boots, said Andrew, placing his hands in his coat pockets and fiddling with the material inside. Your mother always told me that you used to love going on camping trips with your friends and that you loved to explore the outdoors. Well, I saw that you only had one pair of shoes, and they would have been ruined if you were to try to hike on any part of this land. So I thought you could use a pair that could handle the environment. I hope you like them. Virginia opened the box. Inside was a pair of brand new hiking boots in her size. Oh, said Andrew, and if you were wondering about where your other shoes are, they are back by the front door now. I took them with me hoping to get the right size for you. We can return them for a better size if they still don't fit. Andrew pointed to the shoes. The company that makes those is actually the best brand I've ever seen. Several people out here like to use them. Not just for hiking, mind you. He waited anxiously for his niece's response. Virginia looked at the shoes for a long moment. She lightly stroked her fingers across their brown leather siding and pulled one out of the box to look at it. She had not worn a pair of hiking boots in years. The only ones she had ever owned were no longer in her possession. She placed the shoe back in its box and closed the lid. Thank you, she said softly, not lifting her eyes to him. You could hike into the unknown parts of these woods with those, said Stacy, and be like the girl in the story we were talking about. What story was that? Inquired Andrew. The one about the family who used to own this house years and years ago? Andrew's face lit up. Ah, yes, the one of Rose and Burning Eagle. Burning Eagle? Asked Virginia, puzzled. Yeah, those were the names of the young couple, said Andrew. Rose Cohen and Burning Eagle. Virginia mouthed those names, storing them in her mind. Rose Cohen and Burning Eagle. Andrew's face lit up again. Oh, before I forget. Now listen, if you don't want to focus on your school right now, I completely understand. However, there is a friend of mine I've been talking to about you. He's a substitute teacher. He said he would be willing to teach you so that you don't fall behind in your studies. A gray look crossed Virginia's face. She stared aimlessly at the floor. His name is Philip, Andrew continued, and he's really a nice guy. He pointed out towards the barn. His son actually works for me out here and is every bit like his father. I can call Philip today and see if he's willing to start next week if... No, thank you, interrupted Virginia softly. I'm sorry, honey? Questioned Andrew. Thank you, but I don't want to study here. Oh, okay then, said Andrew pleasantly. Well, I promised your aunt that you would keep up your education somehow, but what would you like to do, honey? If you don't want to bother with school right now, that is completely fine. There's no need to fuss over something that could be picked back up in a couple of months from now once the spring semester starts. I want to go to school. Andrew was trying to follow his niece as best as he could. Oh, well, we can make that happen. So just to be clear, honey, you're saying that you would want to go to a local high school, correct? Virginia slowly lifted her eyes for only a second to meet her uncle's. Yes, please. Okay, well, for that, we will need your transcripts from your previous school in Miami. Since we do not have those, are you sure you would rather not have a private tutor come here? I have them. Andrew raised his eyebrows. You have your transcripts with you? Yes. I had Jonathan get them for me before we left home. Jonathan? Your old chauffeur? Virginia raised her head and looked her uncle in the eyes. Yes, my chauffeur. Okay. Andrew took a deep breath and gave a single clap enthusiastically. Well, we can make this work. He glanced up at the ceiling, trying to calculate the procedure in his mind. Let's see, today is Friday. If we registered you right now, you could possibly start on Monday, but I'm not entirely sure. There is a local high school in town about 45 minutes away called Mason High. If you would like, we could go and see about getting you registered." Virginia nodded her head. "Okay, well, go and get yourself ready, and we can leave here in about 30 minutes if you would like." Without saying a word, Virginia walked past her uncle and went upstairs to her bedroom. Andrew turned and looked at her with concern as she walked away, and then walked over to the kitchen table where his daughter was sitting. "This has been the most awkward time I've ever had," he said, shaking his head and taking a seat. "I really don't know how to break through with her." Stacy smiled sympathetically. "She just needs some time." "Yeah, maybe. But going to school with a bunch of people she doesn't know after all that has happened? Oh, I was sure she would have wanted to be taught here, where she wouldn't have to worry about anything like that. She might like to get out and clear her mind. She might really need this. Yeah, I just think it's a lot of trouble. After all, her aunt will be coming to pick her up in just a short time." "So, just when will Aunt Elizabeth arrive?" "She's postponed all her business trips across Europe to oversee the renovation of Virginia's old house. She's able to work remotely from that house for the time being. Once the house is finished, she will come to pick up Virginia, and then after everything has been taken care of over here in the States, she will proceed with the legal arrangements to become Virginia's legal guardian. They'll both live in England together."
"But Daddy, I thought you said that you were made Virginia's legal guardian."
"Yes, this is true, but once the gravity of this present situation hit us all, reality took us to a new level."
"Papers and legalities are no longer the concern of either Elizabeth or me."
After seeking the consultation of the police force in Miami, we were informed that Virginia's life might still be on the line.
"Elizabeth lives overseas, and the chances of Virginia living a life of complete freedom without having to look over her shoulder every second of the day would be better offered to her there."
Even though she is hundreds of miles away from Miami, living here in East Tennessee, her chance of living a more secure life rests with her aunt. After sitting down with Elizabeth, she and I came to an agreement, which allowed Virginia to choose for herself. She would live here in Tennessee with me until she completed her high school education to see if this is where she would like to live, and then her aunt would pick her up and take her to England, presenting a new life option for Virginia to experience. In the end, we both told Virginia that she was the one who would make the final choice of where she would like to live. It is completely up to her. How are things with you and your sister?" Andrew paused for a moment and looked at the floor. "Elizabeth and I have not spoken for over 30 years. That one time we sat down to discuss Virginia's safety was an even more awkward conversation than the ones I'm experiencing with Virginia. Elizabeth feels I will influence her in a way that she doesn't see as truthful or fit. The fact that Virginia is here to stay with me until the end of the school year outrages her. Nevertheless, we both agreed, in the end, that the final decision of where Virginia lives would be Virginia's to make." Stacy reached her hand out and touched her father's arm. "And Virginia needs just what you have to share with her. All that you can give doesn't just come from you firsthand. It was given to you and meant for you to pass on to someone else." Andrew smiled and placed his hand on top of his daughter's hand. "I believe so, too." Stacy's face became more concerned. "Daddy, does she know about the people responsible for their deaths? Does she know who we are protecting her from?" Andrew looked into his daughter's eyes. "No, and I want to keep it that way. I do not want to frighten that young girl. It's best to keep everything on a low profile for now." "30 minutes passed. Andrew and Virginia were now on the road together in the big white pickup. Virginia wore her hood close over her head. They were on the road for at least 15 minutes, and neither one uttered a word. Andrew tried several times to strike up a conversation, but every thought seemed to be a dumb one. Finally, After a long time of driving and silence, Andrew mustered up the only thing he believed would express his concern. "Virginia," he began, "I understand that things have not been exactly what you have expected, but I'm concerned for you, honey. I need to know if there's anything that I can do to help you. How do you feel about everything?" Virginia did not answer. She faced forward, eyes fixed on the road. Neither a shift nor a twitch of body motion hinted that she had heard her uncle speak to her. Andrew's heart sank. Everything he was doing seemed to fail him. Everything. Another 30 minutes passed, and they soon pulled into a school parking lot. The school was built of red brick and followed the architecture of a 19th century college. Above the school was a sign reading, "Mason High." The place looked a bit dirty. Windows were covered in a smudge and guarded with bars. Despite its beautiful vintage appeal, its maintenance had been neglected and subjected to the vandals of the town. Across the parking lot, opposite the high school facade, was a large clock tower that reached 4 stories tall, its brick matching the school. To Virginia's amazement, the clock tower was in better condition than the school building. Its face read 8:03 a.m. Its top was a large white dome supported by 5 pillars, with a giant bell hanging inside. The campus was in decent condition. The lawn was mowed, beautiful saplings were planted around the school grounds, and even a flower bed encompassed the front of the school. The only uninviting thing to be seen was the school building itself. "Well, this is it," said Andrew, parking the truck. He turned off the diesel engine and looked at his niece. "What do you think?" Virginia did not know what to think. Everything had beauty written all over it, but the vandalism of the building itself was what spoiled the attraction of the school. She managed to express false emotions, finally. "It's great. How soon can I get signed up?" Surprised, Andrew opened his door. "Well, hopefully today." Virginia opened her door and got out of the truck. Together, she and her uncle walked up the brick steps and through the main double doors of the school. "Now, because of work, I will not be able to drive you to school," said Andrew. "So you could take the school bus or the Bronco parked in the barn. Which one would you prefer?" Virginia looked at her uncle with a quizzical expression. "What's a Bronco?" Virginia stood in front of the 2 big barn doors as Andrew went to open them. With a big push on each handle, the massive doors slid open. Stationed inside the barn gazing at Virginia was a pair of headlights that looked like floodlights, mounted upon an old rusty red truck with a hardtop fastened on the back. "Now, I know it doesn't look like much," Andrew said, "but this has gotten me out of more complications than you can imagine." He went over and slapped his hand on top of the hood. "This is by far the most powerful engine I have ever seen. One time we had the tractor stuck deep in mud. With this bad boy's help, we could pull it out with a 30-foot chain." Virginia stood with her arms crossed, an unimpressed look on her face. "Well, come on now, have a look at her." Andrew walked around to the driver's door and opened it up. "Take a seat and see what you think from the inside." Virginia lowered her head and walked toward the monstrous vehicle. She stood in front of the open door, looking into the truck. The seat had a few cuts in the cloth fabric. The floor had been covered in mud and dead leaves. The leather on the steering wheel was old and had begun to dry rot. "Well, go on now," encouraged Andrew. "Hop in." Virginia grabbed the steering wheel and pulled herself into the truck, sitting down upon its worn cushion. Andrew closed the door and ran around to the other side of the vehicle, acting as if he was 16 and his friend was about to give him a ride in a new car. He opened the door and plopped down in the passenger seat. "All right. Do you know how to drive a stick?" Virginia's face went blank momentarily as she stared aimlessly at the steering wheel. "Yes. Dad taught me a year ago when I was 16. Andrew became reverent. "Oh, well, have you driven a lot, then, with a stick shift?" Virginia looked down at the shifter. "Not really. I mean, I know how to drive. I've done it a couple of times in the past." Andrew raised his hands. "And you see, that's the beauty of it, because you already know how to drive one. Your dad was always a good—" Andrew caught himself mid-sentence. Quickly, he restructured his words. If your dad taught you, then this should be easy. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small carabiner with 3 keys. This one opens the tailgate, this one unlocks the driver's door, and this one starts the truck. We had to replace the lock on the driver's side door, that's why there's a 3rd key. He handed them to Virginia. Go ahead, fire her up. Virginia took the keys from her uncle. She placed the proper one into the ignition and turned it. Nothing happened. Oh, the clutch, honey, said Andrew, pointing to the pedal on the far left side of the firewall. You have to push in the clutch and the brake to start it up. Virginia placed her left foot on the clutch and her right on the brake, pushing them both to the floor. She turned the key once more. Then, with a pitter and a patter, counting off like a metronome, the engine turned and began to roar like a hungry beast. Ah, yes, exclaimed Andrew. You hear that, honey? That's the sound of power. Virginia seemed more scared than excited about the loud engine. She gripped the steering wheel with both hands tightly. What now? Okay, now this bad boy is a very old model truck, but your dad was a fine man, and I have no doubt that he taught you well. It's just like riding a bicycle. You never forget. Virginia continued to stare unresponsibly at the steering wheel, and Andrew saw that his encouragement was not helping. He reached out, gently took Virginia's right hand and placed it upon the shifter. Okay, honey, like this. Take the shifter and put it up in the far left corner for 1st gear. With his hand upon hers, Andrew guided Virginia's hand and helped her place it into 1st gear. Just like that, sweetie. Virginia's eyes glazed over as she stared down at the shifter. An old, soft voice played in her head. That's right, sweetie. Just like that. Virginia was no longer in the old Bronco. She was in a sporty BMW. The seats were clean leather, and the floor was spotless. The sun was out, and the sky was bright blue. The old voice was like a familiar dream of the past, calmly giving her instructions on the car's mechanisms and the hows and whys of properly shifting gears. But she did not pay any attention to the vehicle. She just looked at the man sitting next to her. He was in his late 40s. He had Virginia's brown eyes and nose. His hair was black, short, and tightly curled. He rested his hand on top of Virginia's hand as she held the shifter to the car, guiding her through every gear before they drove out onto the street. Now, when you're on the road, you will have to take control and shift yourself, but don't worry. The man gave a little reassuring squeeze on top of Virginia's hand. I'll be here with you. Should you need any help, just say so, and I'll help guide you. Virginia, came a voice. Virginia. Virginia shook her head as if she had come out of a trance. She looked up at her uncle. Virginia, is everything all right? Asked Andrew. Virginia looked down at the shifter with Andrew's hand still on top of hers. But don't worry. I'll be here with you. Her eyes began to swell, and her face tightened and turned red. Tears ran down her cheeks. She took her feet off the clutch and the brake. The truck shook, and the engine died. She thrust the door open and hopped out, crossing her arms and lowering her head. She returned to the house. Andrew sat in the truck, watching her walk down the gravel driveway. He looked down at his left hand. The bags under his eyes began to puff up, and his lips started to tremble. He gripped his hand into a fist and slammed it into the dashboard. He cursed and hit the dashboard a few more times. Pressing his palms into his forehead, he leaned back into the seat. Oh, God, help me, he prayed. What am I supposed to do? Virginia opened the house's side door that led into the kitchen and slammed it behind her. She charged through the kitchen, into the foyer, and up the stairs. She ran up to her room and slammed the door behind her. Her breath was deep, her eyes red, and her cheeks were streaked by cascading tears. Disillusioned and undirected, she walked back and forth in her room. Her soul burned within her chest. You said you would be there for me, she mumbled. She stopped and looked up into the heavens. pointing a finger at someone high above her. "You said you would be there for me," she screamed. "You both were there for me. Why? Why are you not here?" She fell to the floor, sobbing, and dug her fingers into the carpet beneath her. No one was there to hold her as they could. No one was there to kiss or love her as they would. No one was there to cradle her in his arms as he did. No one was there to stroke her hair like she would. No one was there like they had been. She gnashed her teeth and gripped the carpet fibers in her fist as she tried to hold back the pain. The burning in her soul would not loosen, and the indescribable anguish of her broken heart translated through her bitter weeping.
This is the end of Chapter 2. Tune in next Thursday for Chapter 3. If you'd like to listen to the next chapter ad-free ahead of everyone else, then subscribe to Early Access and tune in on Sunday. If you like what you heard, please like and subscribe and share with your friends and family. It really helps the show. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all major podcasting platforms. What Shines with the Dawn was written and created by C. Taylor Eason. Copyright Christian Taylor Eason, 2024.